There is really nothing I hate more than walking in circles after getting lost. You go by one road and feel like you've seen this tree before. You go by another road and feel like you've seen this rock before. You try to go back home and feel like you've been in this home before. Wait, do I live here? Strange. Anyway, I get a similar sense of deja vu when I look at what's happening between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza. I feel like we've been here before. And no, I'm not talking about what happened in Gaza in 2006 or 2008 or 2010 or 2012, and no, I am not even referring to what happened in 2014, 2018 and 2021. I think you get the point by now. So no, I am not talking about any of these events, even though those also give me a sense of deja vu. I am talking about the first Lebanon war. And I believe that after I show you just how similar things are, you too will feel as if what's happening with Hamas in Gaza has, in a sense, happened before with the PLO in Lebanon. Although I guess this time we're not seeing fights against the Syrian army, and we're also not seeing a massive air battle with tons of planes and air defense systems being destroyed. There's none of that. But still, see for yourselves how similar these events are. So, for starters, the Lebanon War was, in a sense, Israel's first war against a Palestinian organization that behaves like an army. This organization was the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. The story, in short, is that the PLO failed in an attempt to take over Jordan in 1970 and was expelled into Lebanon. There, it had been able to fortify and establish itself as an entrenched army that was ready for a fight. It also continued its actions against Israel. After all, when this organization called itself the Palestinian Liberation Organization, it meant to liberate all of Palestine, that is, from the river to the sea, that is, the entirety of the state of Israel. So, where are the similarities here? Well, in Gaza today, Israel is also fighting against the Palestinian military organization, which is well entrenched and prepared. Only this time, this isn't the PLO, because the PLO are too busy running the Palestinian Authority. No, this time it's Hamas, a political rival of the PLO and an Islamic organization, unlike the supposedly secular PLO. Not only that, because back then the PLO was also entrenched in the civilian population of the refugee camps in Lebanon, much like Hamas is entrenched in civilian population in Gaza today. The PLO then, like Hamas today, also had an interest in acting from within the civilian population in order to slow Israel down. And just like in Gaza today, Israel had tried to avoid civilian casualties so that the international community wouldn't press it to accept a ceasefire. Back then, every significant loss of civilian lives would turn the international opinion against Israel. So it was in the PLO's interest for Israel to cause as much civilian death as possible. Israel would try to avoid this by trying to get the civilians to leave. That is very similar to what is happening in the Gaza war, in which Hamas and the Iranian Axis in general have an interest in seeing as many civilian deaths as possible, because it proves their position against Israel. They would very much like to drag Israel into a ceasefire before it could achieve its goals. Civilian casualties are an excellent way for them to do that, even if these civilians are on their side. And in both wars, the Palestinian organizations use mosques and hospitals for military purposes, so there's nothing new here too. By the way, while we're at it, the PLO used to hold northern Israel hostage due to its rocket attacks. Hamas has done the same for years, only with southern and not northern Israel. And you might think that's not enough similarities, so how about this one? In the Lebanon War, the Israeli government accused the PLO of being like the Nazis. The claim was that the Palestinian leadership would perpetrate another Holocaust against the Israelis if only they could. Menachem Begin, who was Israel's prime minister at the time, saw Arafat as a sort of modern Hitler, and Beirut as a sort of modern Berlin. This is again similar to the war in Gaza. Many Israeli leaders said that the Hamas members are like the Nazis after witnessing what Hamas did to them on October the 7th. And both wars also had Israel laying siege to places and preventing the entrance of fuel into them. More similarities? In both wars, the Arab world had refused to take in any Palestinian refugees. We are seeing this happen again today, and Egypt had even declared that it is prepared to go to war with Israel rather than accept a single refugee. By the way, just because they say that doesn't mean they mean that. This might have just been said to improve positions in future negotiations. But at any rate, that's a similarity. And speaking of Egypt, both in the Lebanon War and in the Gaza War, the Egyptians were especially salty about the entire affair. In the case of Gaza, it's because the war is right on their border and because they are trying to be seen as key players in the Arab world that doesn't like Israel. In the Lebanon war, it was because Israel had just signed peace treaty with them, and they felt like Israel was using the treaty in order to act aggressively without having to fear another Egyptian front. This, of course, was also not popular with the Arab world. Israel's aim in both wars was to eventually lead into a change of regime in the area that it was active. In Lebanon, it wanted the Christians to take over the country, and in Gaza, the goal is to remove Hamas and to replace it with, well, I don't know exactly yet, but those watching me from the future might know by then, or by now, depends on when you're watching. Do tell us in the comments. But I do hear you. The Lebanon War is not the Gaza War. They are completely different events. Here are some differences between them. Starting with the first of them, the justification for the war. Back in the Lebanon War, Israel wanted to take out the PLO that it saw as a threat, but finding a real justification for large-scale action proved difficult. This caused both international and internal problems for Israel. Many Israelis were against the war, and even more than that, many Israeli ministers were against the war. Lots of manipulating and lying was needed in order to get the cabinet to approve many actions. This is not the case in the Gaza war, in which the consensus is that Hamas started the war by its barbaric action on Israeli civilians. There is wide popular support for the war, and Israel is enjoying wide international support. I suppose that when the protocols become unclassified, we will be able to know what disagreements the ministers had, but generally, the need for war is widely accepted. This time, the Israeli public is ready for a long war and agrees that it is necessary. It is also ready to pay the price, unlike in Lebanon, in which the price was too heavy compared to what the Israeli public was willing to put up with. Also, this time around, the Israelis widely accept this whole Nazi comparison, unlike what happened in Lebanon. Many Israelis thought Begin was exaggerating by comparing Arafat to Hitler. Another difference between the wars? Well, there is no Syrian army involved this time. One of Israel's goals in the Lebanon war was to reduce the Syrian influence in there, but I suppose there are some similarities here actually, because the Syrians were simply replaced by the Iranians. Removing Hamas and the Islamic Jihad from Gaza would also serve to remove the Iranian influence over it. But in the Lebanon War, Israel used to have allies inside of Lebanon. These were the Christian phalangists. In Gaza, there is no such thing. No military organizations are allied to Israel in Gaza. And also, there isn't really significant non-Muslim population, but it's probably better this way. Last time Israel cooperated with the Christian phalanges, it did not work out so well. I'm not going to get into that here. At any rate, the geopolitical situation is also completely different. The Lebanon War was waged when Egypt, who had been Israel's main rival, had just signed a peace agreement. But today, Israel's main rival is Iran, and Iran has proxies throughout the Middle East, which is not something Egypt had to the same degree. So, while the Lebanon War was relatively isolated, the Gaza War has a much bigger impact on the Muslim world, not to mention the compounding effects of social media that didn't exist back then. But there is also another difference that seems to play right into Israel's hand, at least on the face of it. The Lebanon War was waged during the Cold War. That means that there were always two superpowers watching. These superpowers could force a ceasefire in the UN Security Council. So in practice, Israel would try to achieve its war goals before the superpowers demanded a ceasefire. Okay, so that is very similar to today, but the key difference is this. The risk of escalation was way higher during the Cold War. There was always the risk of the Soviets feeling threatened by Israeli dominance in the Middle East and threatening intervention in favor of its Arab allies. This could cause American intervention as well and escalate into a world war. For this reason, the superpowers would rush in to force a ceasefire back then, even if Israel was yet to achieve its goals. The best example of this is what happened after the Suez Crisis. But today, there is only one superpower. The US has lots of considerations, both internal and international, so Israel won't be free to fight forever, but since there are no Soviets threatening war, Israel has way more time, especially after the way it was attacked on the 7th of October. Now, the truth is that there is one more important thing, but I still don't know if it's a similarity or a difference between the war. That thing is the result. Who wins? Who comes out on top? Back in Lebanon, Israel might have been able to kick the PLO out of it, but it also set in motion the events that led to the creation of Hezbollah, so I don't know if that's better, not to mention the Syrian takeover of Lebanon that has since turned into an Iranian domination. Would a similar thing happen in Gaza? There's no telling. But in order to best handle things, I do hope that all of the leaders involved are also feeling a very strong sense of deja vu.